All right, welcome to our June 23rd school board work session. The time is now 5:30 p.m. The school board would like to take this moment to respectfully acknowledge we are residing on the traditional land of the Dene people. Our mission is to provide an excellent, equitable education in a safe, supportive environment so all students will succeed and contribute to a diverse and changing society. Mrs. Richardson, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Burgess? Here. Ms. Carol Hubbard?
Here.
Mr. Doran?
Here.
Ms. Dulian?
Here.
Ms. Maple? Here. Mrs. Hardy? Here. Mrs. Burnett?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Superintendent Dr. Luke Miner and Andy DeGraw, Chief Operations Officer, will continue their discussion and work with the board on different scenarios working towards an approved FY26 budget to be acted on tomorrow at our afternoon meeting. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Dr. Miner.
All right. Thank you, President Burnett. We do have a slide deck that I think Mr. DeGraw will bring up in just a second. Our last work session, we were talking about add backs to the budget. It felt a little bit different than I think the conversations we're going to have this evening after the extremely disappointing veto by Governor Dunleavy. The last time we had conversations, we were talking about things that we could potentially reinvest back into our district after working through a $16 million deficit. And tonight we're adding on to that deficit, unfortunately. And so continued very difficult conversations and decisions by this board on top of the hard decisions that you've already had to make due to inadequate funding at the state level. And so we've put together a general overview of where we are currently at today, and then some recommendations for the board at the end. And then we'll have some conversations about how the board is feeling and which direction you would like to go to balance this budget. So I'll turn it over to Mr. DeGraw to get us started.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Meinert. We'll go ahead and jump into the slides. As he mentioned, we've kind of just grabbed a few. It's been a while. It seems like many moons ago that we started, our proposed budget dialogue back in February. We started working on big budget items even in last year, I think November, December timeframe. So it's been a long time. And so a lot of this is just a recap, but it'll kind of reset the stage and ground you in where we're at today so you can make the best decisions possible the next couple of days. So looking at where we stand now as far as our deficit since the governor's veto last week, our June 9th work session, we reported a surplus at that point in time of approximately $2.5 million. The governor's veto ended up being between $4.5 and $4.6 million. There's a couple of different ways that could be calculated, but it's going to land right in that range regardless of how the numbers unfold. Because of that lower state revenue, we are reducing the charter allocations by approximately $300,000 to the 5 various charters in the district. And then that leaves us with a total budget deficit anticipated of $1.75 million as of right now. And these are all estimates and rounded.
We were both doing the same thing. Mrs. Hardy.
Clarify, we're not reducing it by $300,000. The state, so the governor vetoed and reduced the charter school allocation by $300,000.
Yes, that's correct. So that reduction of $300,000 reflects the reduction of approximately $200 BSA reduction from the governor's veto. That's correct.
Mr. Dorn.
Okay, so that's 300,000 is actually included the 4.5 million.
The $1.75 million bottom line includes the $300,000. The $300,000 is not incorporated into the $4.5 million cut.
Okay, so the governor's veto actually represents 4.8.
It's actually
US.
opposite of that, Mr. Doran. So the 4.5 million is a reduction in revenue. The $300,000 charter allocation was a reduction to the expenditure side of our budget. So the expense to the district of a charter is the annual allocation we're required to give.
Right.
So it's actually 4.5 less the $300,000. So it's really a 4.2 net reduction.
Okay, can I do follow-up?
Follow up, Mr. Dorn.
And just so I understand how we're looking at the numbers, the governor's veto, so in our recommended budget, we had a reduced amount to the charter schools because we were anticipating it would not be in the BSA.
Yeah.
This is based on the BSA.
Yeah. So in that sense, Mr. Dorn, I don't have the exact numbers there, but yes, it likely could involve an increase in our costs compared to when we were assuming a half reduction to our charter allocation. Yeah, that would be accurate.
Okay, then we may come back to that because if it's an increase, then that's something we need to make up. I'm thinking we're probably close to the wash on it, but
So these numbers, so I would say, to coin a phrase, that's water under the bridge, I would say, Mr. Doran. We've now reconciled, these are, when we were looking at half reduction to the charters, fast forward to today, these are actual numbers with everything trued up. So this is a full charter allocation based on a $500 BSA increase. That's a $4.5 million loss in revenue based on the $500 BSA increase as opposed to the $700 that was in HB 57. So I would say there's nothing left to reconcile as far as our deficit is concerned. That's the bottom line deficit.
all right, thank you.
Ms. Carol Hubbard?
I feel sort of silly asking this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Why 1.75? Why not 1.7?
It's actually 1.731, and this is straight from our My Budget File budgeting software. So we have every dollar of revenue plugged in, we have every expenditure plugged in, and it has spit out a $1.731 million deficit.
Okay.
And these are rounded numbers, Ms. Carol Hubbard. I typically, for clarity's sake, try to avoid $1,731,568.
Sure. I just didn't, just the way that
yeah.
you rounded on here didn't make sense to my elementary school
and,
brain.
and relatively new to the board. So yeah, just that's kind of my style as I present the numbers to the board and the public, is just to try to avoid down to the last very dollar. Okay. Things are so dynamic and change so quickly. And it's typically best to go off of estimates just for clarity and whatnot. So,
Thank you.
Good, that's a great question.
Mrs. Julian?
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about that $4.5 million governor veto? It's my understanding that that's based on enrollment, and I believe that our enrollment projections for next year is a decline that would equal, is it 11,626 students total?
That's correct.
Are we still projecting that?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, continue, Mr. DeGraw.
All righty, moving to the next slide. This is a slide that summarizes the total deficit that we are confronted with for the FY26 budget. We started with a $16 million deficit at our proposed budget. This adds, and again, this rounded, we plugged in a 1.7 and change deficit, rounded to 1.8. So approximately a $17.8 million total deficit that the district is having to overcome for our FY26 budget. Just to recap reductions that we've made to date. So the big item being PTR, or one of the big items. So the increases in each of the three categories in elementary from 25 to 26. in our middle school grades from 28 to 29, and then from 31 to 32 in our high school grades. That was a total reduction of 14.4 FTE district-wide. Specifically in the elementary arena, we closed Midnight Sun Elementary, Pearl Creek Elementary, and Two Rivers Elementary for a savings of $4.6 million. We downsized Salcha Elementary for approximately $500,000 savings, and then we reduced 2.5 FTE Barnett Magnet teachers. And then in secondary, 2.5 FTE counselor reduction at the 3 main high schools, and then a 1 FTE teacher reduction at CEC. And then we terminated the Star of the North building lease in the North Pole area. And the district-wide reductions, we contracted out our evening custodial services for a savings of approximately $3 million. We assumed staff vacancies at around just slightly over $1 million. And then we reduced approximately $500,000 in administration, district-wide administration. And then ongoing reduction of curriculum and staff laptops. District-wide personnel reduction of approximately just shy of 168 positions from FY25's approved budget, and that is a status quo number for our tentative approved budget that we're looking at approving in the next less than 24 hours, I guess. Want to certainly thank the borough for their support. So with the decline in assumed state revenue, we have seen an increase of approximately $4.8 million in our local contribution for this upcoming year compared to the current year. And so that certainly offset those losses in state revenue. We appreciate that very much. Looking at vacancies, we've talked a little bit about vacancies and a lot of questions surrounding that. So starting with certified vacancies, this does not include our special ed certified vacancies. I want to point that out. It's important to note. But in elementary grades, we currently have 5 vacancies, and in secondary, we have 9. And then instructional classified vacancies, again, not including our special ed vacancies. In elementary, we have 7, and secondary 4, so 11 total. There was some questions about foundation payments and the manner in which we receive our revenue from the state. So we actually receive payments monthly from the state. They begin making payments at the beginning of the year based on projections. So right now we're projecting enrollment, we're projecting state foundation revenue. And so they begin the payments based on those estimates, those projections. And at some point in the month of, it's sometime in the month of January, we submit our actuals in October, the 20-day count. And then by mid-January, typically, they've received that data. They've audited the numbers. There's oftentimes duplicate student counts from one district to the other because students are moving around. They audit the numbers, and they come up with a final official enrollment number, final ADM number for the district. And so after that January payment, they have an actual official state foundation revenue for our district. And the last 3 or 4 payments, they adjust either up or down based on whether we projected higher or lower than the actuals that are established. So those last payments are adjusted to get us our actual annual foundation revenue from the state. And then fund balance, a lot of questions on fund balance. We've been scrambling, just trying to dot as many I's and cross as many T's as we can. I previously reported, so the top line is our current fund balance that we have as of the end of FY24. We've looked at FY25 at the end of this year, what we anticipate that might end up being. I had previously estimated between $8 and $10 million that we anticipated at landing. Now I've upped that to $10 to $12 million. So minimum, we're going to drop minimum of about $1.25 million. We know we'll drop, and it could be more than that, just based on how year-end payroll and accounts payable comes in. So that's the current estimate, landing between 10 and 12 million in fund balance.
Mr. Burgess has a question.
Yeah, backing up to the previous slide on foundation payments. I'm just curious how, I think the answer to this is probably pretty obvious, but I just wanted to make sure that it's clear. If a veto override were to happen in January, I would assume that those final 3 to 4 payments would be adjusted with that in mind as well.
Yeah, so the state has already issued us the adjusted foundation revenue that they anticipate based on the 500, based on the lower number. And once that veto is overridden, they would turn around and issue us a new amount. And those last 3 to 4 payments would rise significantly to make up that shortfall, that gap. Yes.
Continue.
So yeah, that's the fund balance that we anticipate, 10 to 12 million.
Mr. Dorn.
Just to clarify, when you mentioned where you anticipate we're going to drop 1.2, 1.4 million, that would bring it to more in that 11. What you're talking about is winding up somewhere between 10 and 11.
Yeah. Right now, I think the highest it would be right in the high 11s, just shy of 12 range is probably the most it'll be. And then, if each year we have a lot of things coming through right now, there's leave cash outs even that come in at the end of the year. So depending on how those come in, it could drop, 11, 10 and a half. But yeah, I would think it's going to be in the 11 and a half range, but don't quote me on that. That's why I have ranges.
No, and I do really appreciate that
Yeah.
you have it here for us right away from the start. So
Yeah. And I think I mentioned last time, a lot of turnover at a high level in our accounting department, and they're getting their feet under them very well and making the transition and doing some good work. So appreciate their help in coming up with these estimates. So, and I think that might be, we'll pass the baton back to Dr. Minert.
That's a good segue into my recommendation. And so generally, I think the board understands I'm pretty conservative in using fund balance. The fund balance numbers did come in a little bit higher than projected in the numbers that we've been talking about this year. So that's some good news. The bad news here is there's not many cuts that the board can employ without making some large disruptions, both at the school level for our students or for our employees. And so that's why on the screen you see my recommendations for the board are fairly limited and do rely on fund balance, or has been discussed, potentially increasing the vacancy rate, which is similar to utilizing fund balance. And so in my list there, this is the maximum amount of reductions that I would recommend to the board. Obviously, there's other conversations the board has had, other reductions that you've talked about, and we can talk through those things. But these are the ones that I would recommend currently. At the secondary level, we've identified one secondary certified teacher that is currently vacant that could potentially be reduced. 5 elementary general education vacancies, which is essentially a 0.5, just under that PTR increase. The board at this point in time can't truly do a PTR increase larger than that because we do have teachers contracted for next school year. But one way to get at that increase could be at eliminating those vacancies that we currently have. The Star of the North head teacher position has been posted for some time, and we've been unsuccessful in recruiting and hiring for that position. The plan there would be to utilize our best head teacher as a co-head teacher for Best and Star of the North. That would be a bit of a reduction to Best because she would have to lose her caseload in terms of the students and families that she's working with, and would take on more of a leadership role for both programs. We do think that's doable, especially given that she already plans to have some time at the Midnight Sun facility for our best families out there, where Star of the North will be housed next year. So that's the plan for that. And then a slight reduction, there's a $10,000 fee, I think Mr. Doran brought up throughout the budget cycle. We took a look at that and can reduce that by about $5,000. So those are the reductions I would recommend to the board. One investment that I recommend, there's been a lot of talk around the state about Coalition of Education Equity and their potential lawsuit against the state for inadequate funding for education. I don't think it's any surprise to the people sitting in this room that adequate funding for education has not been there for some time, in almost a decade. And states that have had lawsuits brought against them have seen some significant turnarounds for not only educational funding for the students, but also that leading to better student outcomes and the things that we're able to provide students. And so it would be my strong recommendation for the board to support Coalition of Education Equity and their potential lawsuit with the state. I think we've waited too long in terms of allowing our students to suffer based on inadequate funding. And so if we can support that effort, I strongly advise the board to make that investment. And then the fund balance utilization there, if you did go with a recommendation, would be just under $1 million, which we have. I'm not usually a big proponent of using fund balance, but I think this is a perfect time to use fund balance. Fund balance is there for unexpected expenses, and this certainly falls within that category. It's a time where the board doesn't have a lot of levers to pull in terms of options for reductions, and it's an amount that feels comfortable to me to use within the fund balance that we have. And so that'll end my initial thoughts, and we're happy to answer any questions that the board might have.
Okay, board. So first, take it easy on me. I will watch the hands as quick as I can. But a couple of things with this. Administration, very much like last time, if you have support behind something, it's important to state you have support behind that. And for the fund balance use issue, it would be good for you to state your position on using fund balance and what you would be comfortable with utilizing for this instance. And so with that, I will open it up to the board for questions.
On that thought.
Yes, go ahead, Dr. Meinert.
And the reason for clearly articulating what you might be comfortable with fund balance is understanding what the revenue side might be going into tomorrow. Mr. DeGraw likes to get it as close as possible for the memo that will be in front of the board tomorrow in the resolution. And so the more knowns we have, or close to knowns we have going into tomorrow night, the easier it is to have a really clear and concise action item for the board.
Thank you, Dr. Meinert. With that, questions from the board. Mrs. Julian.
Thank you. I'm going to speak first about the recommendation for the secondary and one secondary teaching position and the 5 elementary teaching positions to close out those vacancies. And that would be the equivalency of $762,000. I'm very strongly in opposition to that. I spoke very strongly about not increasing class sizes, and this right here would increase class sizes about 0.5% at the elementary school level. We're already increasing class sizes, and I think that this is not the time to cut anything else out of the classroom. So I will be in opposition to that. I'm very much in opposition to that. What I am in support of, and perhaps fund balance, using fund balance to some extent. Also, we have a really good lever to use, which is the negative contingency or the vacancy rate. So I would be in support of increasing that to absorb that $762,000 cut. The reason behind my support of that is because regardless of what the legislature does, we will have to open the budget again mid-year, whether they pass it or not. And or override the veto or not, to either back it out or potentially open it up to really kind of make some tough decisions in this spring. So I see this as a stopgap to put forward a balanced budget today, with the expectation that our legislature acts consistently to how they acted in overriding the veto of House Bill 57 in January, and that would then allow us to revisit this budget in January and back out the use of savings at that point.
Thank you, Mrs. Dooley. And Ms. Maple.
I think that I'm in a similar place to Miss Julian when it comes to the 6 classroom teachers, the 1 secondary, 5 elementary. I know that it was an ongoing almost debate throughout the budget work sessions on like calling something fund balance versus the vacancy rate, and whether or not these are the same things and are just different words for the same thing. And during that conversation, I certainly found myself on that these seem to me to be 2 distinct ways of balancing the budget. And in staying in line with that thought from the initial budgeting sessions, if we don't make those cuts at this time, I don't want to I am not in favor of framing it around this vacancy piece, because I want to be really clear to our legislature that what this would actually be forcing us to do is to pull this 762 100,000 700. I can't talk. That it's pulling it directly from savings. And I would want to be really clear and not mince our words that if we hold on to these positions after already making so many cuts, that this is further dipping well over $1 million, well over $1.5 million into our fund balance that already isn't high enough. But I am at this point in the conversation also resistant to wanting to cut those 6 teaching positions, or rather retain the vacancies as they are right now. But I do understand the Star of the North one, and I am in support of that cut based off what Dr. Meinert has presented to us.
Thank you, Ms. Maple. Mr. Burgess.
Thank you. So for the sake of discussion, I'm going to say I agree with Ms. Maple. However, I also want to suggest, just throw this out there for discussion. I really would prefer not to make any additional cuts to our budget. We have a group of legislators that is fairly confident that the veto override will take place in January. I wish it could happen sooner, but I understand that there's reasons that it has to wait. But I feel that they're very confident, and I want to believe it. So I very strongly support investing in the Coalition for Education Equity. But I do not want to make any of these reductions because I think we've hurt our district enough already. I would be in favor, if we need to do it to produce a balanced budget, I would say let's just use fund balance. That's what we can put in our budget, with the expectation that that the override will happen. Alternatively, because it is actually in law that we should get that $700 BSA increase, I would suggest that we can leave our revenue side untouched as well. And potentially, honestly, I would really like to at the very least, add back the 2.5 Barnett FTE as well. But I'm not comfortable making any more cuts here. despite, and I understand there's a risk that the legislature might lose votes on and end up not overriding the governor's veto, but I just, it seems like one of those situations where any move we make has potential risk. The risk of making these reductions now means that we may be harming the district more than we need to in the end. So that's kind of where I stand right now. What I would advocate for, if we do take that route, is that we make a cut list for in the event that the override does not succeed, and that's similar to what the Anchorage School District has done. So I would ask the administration to develop that cut list. I know that it probably wouldn't be able to look the same as this if we don't make these reductions now because of contracting issues, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Thank you, Mr. Burgess. Mr. Dorn?
We're all looking at each other. Who's going to? Well, I'll speak.
Put your hands up.
Okay, so I'd like to start with some questions, and I do really appreciate the recommendation list within that. I am in favor of the fact that I think we do need to make some cuts, and I look at the use of fund balance actually as a reduction, though I know under the official accounting it's not considered that. But a couple of questions. The secondary vacancy is where?
That one's potentially at Lathrop.
Okay. And do we know the impact of what that would be?
I mean, we've worked with Principal Hecht on that, and he's confident that he'd be able to absorb it within his current master schedule, and so that's how we landed on that potential vacancy.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of the elementary vacancies, where are those at?
I believe there's two at, let me preface this statement is that it doesn't really matter where they're at because we'll make sure that schools are whole and we may have to shift teachers if for some reason the board acted on this. But I believe there's two at Anderson Crawford, two at North Pole Elementary, and one at Arctic Light.
Okay.
Is that correct? One at Wood River. Okay. Shifted a little bit. One at Wood River.
Right, thank you. And understanding, I know once we get the kids in their seats and see their faces, well, there may be adjustments in the fall and the 10-day count that you do there. But that's helpful to know kind of generally where they are. Do you want to pause there? I've got two questions. Okay.
You can have one more.
All right. Let me go to the Star of the North head teacher position. So that's a reduction of a teaching position there. You answered one of my questions that the best head teacher it'll come under best supervision, but that's a loss of a teacher there. Could you explain what that impact is? And part of my reason is the conversation I had in the spring was once they knew a location, there was even a possibility that it would attract students because it has been declining in enrollment. So I'm trying to, what is that impact that leaves?
Two.
Yeah. That's what I thought for 60.
I don't think it's quite that high. I know they have a smaller freshman class coming in, and so that was part of the consideration. I think like any of these or any of the potential conversations that we'll have about cuts, there'll be an impact, and I think it'll be felt strongly by the remaining staff members that are there. I believe the head teacher last year taught social studies, and so we'd be asking our remaining teachers, one to teach social studies in English and the other to teach science and math. And so it would definitely be an increased workload on the teacher and less one-on-one time for our students at Star of the North. Miss Beam and Miss Gillum, who have worked through, the conversations on this cut, feel confident that we could pull it off. But to say that there's not going to be an impact would be false. So
Right.
it would be felt.
Yeah. And follow up. Right.
Follow up, Mr. Dorn.
And in terms of understanding that situation, 2 teachers for the entire high school curriculum, in actuality, I believe that Star of the North has seen a growing number of juniors and seniors who have been going over to North Ball High or such and taking some of those upper level elective courses and things of that sort. So, and they have more independent study plus off is my understanding that the reality, the ability to provide those services, even though they're cut to 2 teachers, I'm just affirming that.
Yeah, I think some of that has happened, and I think in the future, a potential stronger relationship with CECU, who specifically works with juniors and seniors, could develop as well to take some of that workload off of Star of the North. And so, I think those, depending on where the board heads with this conversation, there's potential for different partnerships with existing programs that we have within our district.
Great, thank you.
Mrs. Hardy.
First, a comment, it's kind of. So I was using balancing act, and fund balance is coded as adding to the deficit. I was having a minor freak out because it kept getting larger, but all of them add when you click it. So.
Did you hear that, Michelle?
The fund balance and balancing act, I can show you, Michelle, adds to the deficit when I click it. So like, it gets smaller if I use less fund balance and bigger if I use more. Yeah, I figured, but I was glad. I was like, no, why does it keep getting worse?
This should be getting better.
Should be. And then on to my actual comments. Hearing the different board members, I am in agreement that if we're going to use fund balance, we call it fund balance, mostly because that better illustrates what we're doing to a population that isn't going to easily understand budgeting for negative contingencies. Saying we're spending our savings, I mean, any basic economics understands that. You are spending money you had saved. It's gone. Our savings, if we do end up having those vacancies continue just because we can't fill those positions, then that's great. It won't be as much fund balance. It ends up being the same thing. But being really clear, and this is what we're doing to balance this budget. I'm also having a hard time swallowing increasing our PTR by any. We're not increasing it. The governor's increasing it, and I want to keep language matters. Like, let's put the blame where it belongs. We didn't create this. The governor vetoed and gave us even less money this year than we had, or next year that we have this year. If we do that, though, there are only so many cuts we can make in January. Ms. Peterson sent us another really informative email, which gave some ideas of cuts that we could say are coming, but they would be catastrophic. And the activities funding is in there, and you'd basically have to cancel all activities in spring semester, I think, to get at any real savings across all of our secondary schools. I mean, as somebody who was a multi-sport athlete, I enjoyed school, but I enjoyed school a lot more with activities. How are we going to be able to do that? Again, it's not our fault. It's the governor canceling activities. But I do think being really clear with people that this is what would likely happen in January if a veto override is unsuccessful is really important. If I've learned nothing more than my 3 years of board service, it's that the general population does not understand what we do in this room, does not understand how our budgets are created, and doesn't understand until it personally affects them exactly how important all of the decisions we make here are. And so the more we can be clear and say it in plain language, the more we'll have people advocating to their legislators that you need to stick by your vote. There are enough votes. There are 46 people that voted for this bill, there can be 46 legislators who vote to override. That's where I'm at.
Thank you, Mrs. Hardy. I will throw myself in and then we can jump to another round of questions. Everybody knows I've been trying to put a big protection around this fund balance for 3 years. It's been a sticking point for me. I'm not a fan of using funds that you have saved. You have funds saved for a rainy day for a reason. This is our rainy day, unfortunately. And gosh, I have spent the last week and a half so angry over everything that happened with our veto. Especially because I really feel, board, that we did a really good job of trying to prep as hard as we could for something that would come down the line like that. Administration, I thank you. Luke, thank you for your work. Andy, thank you for your work. Mr. DeGraw, sorry. And with this recommendation, I know after every cut that we have made this year and everything we did, you had to go back to the drawing board and find just a little bit more for us. So I appreciate the work that went into this, but I'm going to side with the board. And I can't. So fund balance it is. That's where I'm at as well. I would favor the Star of the North teacher if that's something that works out. I think that would be something that would be okay. But I also agree that if we're going to use savings, we call it exactly what it is. Trying to explain to people what a negative contingency rate is. Mrs. Dillian, I adore you, but that has been the most complicated thing in my life. So I would agree that if we pull from savings and we're pulling the fund balance, that's what we call it. We call it the fund balance. And then like Mrs. Hardy said, we are very clear with what this means in the spring. As a sports parent myself, an activities parent, somebody who was in band and theater and drama and all the things that I could join myself into, that could hurt big time if that's where this went. Any cut that we would have to make in the spring. So I'm very hopeful that our legislators will override this veto in January. I will stick by the faith of believing in Senator Crunk and Representative Stapp, and that we will get what we need when it comes to January. So that's where I sit. Mrs. Julian.
Okay, thank you. I want to walk through a couple different numbers because I think it's important. So we have right now, and I'm looking back at the budget deficit slide deck, slide number 2. So we had from the work session surplus on the 9th of June, that was a $2.5 million surplus, and that was from the borough, correct? The additional money from the borough?
Yeah, and then coupled with HB 57.
Yes.
Okay, so I just want everybody to hear that. We had a surplus. We could have put money into lowering class sizes. We could have reinstated the Barnett instructional teachers that we had to cut. We could have reinstated extended learning program. We could have lowered class size. We had $2.5 million, and one person in the state of Alaska said no. One person who didn't even have the full support of their party said no, and that was the governor who said no. We're going to go down to a number that we haven't even stated before because our state can't afford public education. We are the wealthiest state in the entire country. We have a sovereign wealth fund that rivals that of individual countries. We have the money. We just don't have one person in office who is brave enough to do the right thing for our students. We had $2.5 million extra dollars. And now we're here and we have $4.5 million hole. That $2.5 million extra dollars got us down to a deficit of $1.75 million. So I really want us to emphasize that. because we're not just talking about 1.75 million. That's what we're doing right now. But over the course of this month, we went from a $2.5 million surplus to a deficit of 1.75 million. And I think that's really important. This is not sustainable. So I also want to state that Mr. Burgess asked at one of our meetings to our mayor if this was a sustainable amount of money from the local contribution. And that answer was not really a yes. It wasn't really a no, but it definitely wasn't a yes. We know that our local contribution is being stretched this year. So going into budgeting season for next year, fiscal year 27, I'm very concerned, which is why using fund balance right now, the only reason that I am supporting balancing a budget on fund balance or the negative contingency is because I'm strongly encouraging us to reopen the budget in January, regardless if the legislature overrides it or not. If they override it, we reopen the budget and we remove that fund balance draw. If they don't override it, I'd encourage us, and so this is my question, Dr. Meinert, to then look at what are more sustainable cuts that we would have to make reopening the budget mid-year. And that question then is, what can we do mid-year that won't violate contracts? Can we furlough? Can we cut? What can we cut mid-year if we decide to reopen? And if it doesn't override and we have to stick with this, and we know that that's not a sustainable draw, and we're looking down the barrel at fiscal year 27 of a similar size deficit plus whatever, what could we do mid-year?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are limitations to what you can do mid-year. You mentioned the word furlough. Most of our employees, if not all of them, are under contract for the next year, and their contracts are very specific in terms of what they're paid in the days that they work, including our non-represented folks. If the board wanted to consider furloughs for our non-reps, that needed to be done before contracts were issued. After the board acted on their contract for the year and employees signed that, that's set in stone in terms of kind of the levers you could pull in terms of furloughs there. As far as mid-year cuts, that's something that Mr. DeGraw, myself, and our team would go back and take a look at. There's certainly limited options mid-year compared to preparing for FY27. But there's definitely things that we could look at that could potentially reduce the deficit more. Now, with that said, as we were talking about earlier, no cuts that we make are not going to be felt by our students, by our employees, and by our families. We've cut year after year, and there's nothing left around that people aren't going to feel. Last year, the board made the difficult decision to a simple cut to cut supplies at our schools. I don't know that I hear more about a single cut than that. Like, schools are stretched to provide paper for our students at elementary schools, which is ridiculous in today's day and age. But those are the types of things that you go back and consider when you don't have adequate funding for education. And so, the opportunities or options that we have at that point in time are limited. But if the board wants myself and the administration to go back and have a cut list prepared for January, we'll certainly be prepared for that.
Mrs. Hardy.
I won't be on the board come January when you guys are encountering these, but to highlight for the community and everybody now, if the legislature fails to override this veto, this board should likely assume next year $500 BSA. It's the same governor. There is no reason why he would not veto it again. So that's what you will be building your budget on. And so all the cuts you've made right now, plus a larger deficit, because it's not getting smaller, Activities won't be a part of your fiscal year 27 budget. So many things will not be a part of that budget because if there's a failure to override, none of us should believe that there will be an override the next year. How can you build trust on that?
Thank you, Mrs. Hardy. I'd have to agree. That is one thing this board really needs to think about. I do not foresee any extra funding next year. I see the 500 BSA and that's it because it's there. It has to go. So it's a very good point to make. With that, we're going to go to Miss Carol Hubbard and then we'll go to you, Mr. Dorn.
Thank you. So thinking about next year, just since Mrs. Hardy just brought that up, it seems like next year might be the time to be considering high schools because we have 2 high schools that are at very low capacity that could almost be folded. So as much as I hate to say that, I come from the 60s, 70s, when we had an AM/PM high school. And everybody, this was before West Valley, before North Pole. We had one school. And we did an AM/PM, and it's what you do when you have to do it. So speaking of next year, we just tuck that in your pocket, please, because I'll be bringing it up again. Based on the amount of positive growth that we've seen in the elementary schools over the last 2 years, I'm really hesitant to cut elementary school teachers. It's kind of our shining star, you know, and I'm really disappointed that Dunleavy did not hear from us more about how well our students are doing, moving out of the far below proficient into the proficiency rate and how successful the walk to read is and how successful these programs are. And my fear would be that if we would reduce elementary school teachers, that we're going to overtax the teachers that are left and that it's just not going to be the same. I don't want to use the fund balance, but I also don't necessarily want, I don't want to do any of this. And I'm so mad I can hardly talk. I didn't expect these recommendations. So I'm just bummed. I don't know about the vacancy rate. I guess maybe I need to learn more about the vacancy rate, but it seems like if we have vacancies and we're budgeting for them, I guess that goes into savings. So I don't know. I would spend the fund balance. I would vote to spend the fund balance over removing teachers 100%, and I would throw the dice on the legislature reversing the veto. So that's where I stand.
Thank you, Ms. Carol Hubbard. Mr. Dorn.
I still have some questions, but I'm going to give some global stuff first and come back to the questions after. I'm in support of taking $1 million out of fund balance. I am pleased to see that we're estimating rough, spitting into the wind, however you want to call it, but a little higher than where we've been. It's still less. We will have less of a fund balance than we did last year. So our fund balance is continuing to decline overall. But I do think that $1 million at this point, so close to the start of the school year, we're only, 6-7 weeks away when teachers come back. That is a reasonable amount to do. I'm very cognizant of the million in vacancies, which is basically out of fund balance. I am mindful of the more positions we cut, the less vacancies we can anticipate. But that's a backup there, and if I am correct, we still are projecting that we will need to subsidize transportation to what about, I think it's about $500,000. So, I mean, that's all coming out of fund balance. But I'm comfortable with that, and looking at reversibilities, I am comfortable with raising elementary PTR by 0.5. If we get an increase in student enrollment, we're going to be able to account for that. We're going to, we're going to be out hiring teachers. We're going to be raising our revenue projection if we see that increase in enrollment. If we don't, or we are over projecting our enrollment, then we know we're going to be dipping into fund balance with that. But the reason why I'm comfortable with that is that we are cutting a lot of other things to the bone. Supplies, we goes under the radar, but it makes a big difference. Some of the curriculum things, it kind of rides under the radar, but they make a difference. But we can reverse that. If we get the money in January, we can go out and hire teachers, assuming they're there. We have to recognize there is a teacher shortage. That's why we have vacancies in the teaching ranks. But they are reversible. And people say, oh, well, January is too late. It's hard on kids and stuff like this. I will tell you, every time that I've had to reorganize a grade level and add a classroom, another teacher, there has been support to do that, because it meant that then parents and their kids got smaller classes. We were able to do that. I have not done it as late as January. I have done it at the end of November. But I'm cognizant of LAD, the year that they were literally adding a classroom per month, and that was well into the spring. They added a classroom, and the parents and kids and staff were like, wow, it's well, there's movement, but it's well worth it. So to me, that's a real reversible if that comes about. And so I'm supportive of that, and I'm supportive of using the fund balance. And I'll pause there and then put me back in the key.
Thank you, Mr. Doran. So we're going to go Ms. Maple, then Ms. Hardy, then Mr. Burgess.
Because I didn't say it earlier, just for clarity, I do also support, in spite of the situation we're in, because of the situation we're in, the investment in the Coalition of Education Equity. I didn't speak to that at first. But I did just want to say, just for the sake of saying it, that I really appreciate the work that it went into putting this recommendation forward. As painful as it is to see more cuts at this, this juncture, I think it would have been really irresponsible for the administration to put forward the suggestion that we use fund balance, and also would have been like an inappropriate risk, because who knows what this board would decide they wanted to do. And if the board had said, no, we want to cut, we don't want to use fund balance, that it would have been us sitting around this table trying to come up with the best cuts to make, instead of our administration doing the hard work together to put forward the most educated possible, as painful as they are, cuts that we could have considered. So I just wanted to just say that out loud, that while I don't want to make cuts, I do really appreciate the work that the administration put into this, and why we got here, and the explanation that we received on why these are the cuts that you landed on for us to consider. So that's all.
Thank you, Ms. Maple. Mrs. Hardy.
On the same fund balance train, just questions confirming. So if we don't cut any certified positions, it looks like it would end up being a $1.7 million draw on the fund balance.
If we did 0 cuts, just to clarify, is that
So keep the Star of the North and the 5,000 NWA, the other recommendations, but as board members have kind of said, don't cut secondary, don't cut elementary. What would the draw on the fund balance be?
yeah, it would remain. So the deficit, the beginning, the early slide deficits that were presented didn't include the education equity lawsuit dollars, 125K. So it would be about, it'd be about in the 1.75 million range. So if we reduce the Star of the North head teacher, it would be offset by that education equity funding. So yeah, about 1.75.
Follow up. So looking at the total projected fund balance, and we have that draw, and then budgeting for negative contingencies. If worst case scenario, slightly best case, we fill all our vacancies. So we're spending that money, but we're spending it in the classroom, and we draw on our fund balance. What would be the expected fund balance then? I know we're like horseshoes and hand grenades for fiscal year 27.
Yeah. So the total, we see the negative contingency, the budget for vacancies, the same as utilization of fund balance. So the total dollar would be about 2.8 million. And then we would just have to wait and see a lot of variables in play. Overall district spending, the level of vacancies. Anecdotally, we're seeing far fewer vacancies currently than we have in the past. We just need to see overall district spending needs next year. Enrollment coming in the fall would be a big variable as well. But yeah, on the books, we would be budgeted about 2.8.
Which would put that range in between 7 and 9 that we were talking about earlier.
Mr. Burgess.
Thanks. Yeah, and just to follow up on that, I had been doing the math here as well, and Mr. DeGraw was correct if according to the numbers on slide 13, doing the math on the actual calculator, not even in my head. But I also wanted to just throw out the figure that if we do make the investment and we do not make any of these reductions, it would be pushing a $2 million draw on fund balance, I believe. And I want to say again, I would actually be okay with that. Because of the situation that we're in, and the fact that any other cuts that we make are potentially are harmful to the district, not potentially. I also wanted to go back to what Ms. Carol Hubbard said a little bit ago. I agree strongly that I don't want to reduce our positions in elementary schools. And in large part because of the successes that we've seen, I don't think we can continue that if we continue to strain our staff even more. But I did want to just clarify, like I think we did, as a district and as a board, I think we've done a good job showing those successes, highlighting those successes and reporting them as we are supposed to do. And it is we have highlighted that we are doing what the governor wants, what other folks in the legislature have been asking for, is improving student outcomes. We're doing a great job of it despite the hardships, and that doesn't mean that we can continue to do it with the hardships or with even greater hardships. But we got that message out. The fact that it wasn't listened to is not our fault. So I just wanted to clarify that. When we can show that we are having the successes that are being asked for, when people hold education funding hostage because they claim that we are not improving outcomes, we show that we are improving outcomes, and they continue to hold that education funding hostage. That is squarely on them. That shows that their goals are not necessarily what they state that they are, or that they don't understand the issue. So I just want to throw that out there. And then last thing, it's a little just going back to Ms. Peterson's email, if we are going to be making cuts or a cut list, I would support the ideas that came out of that. Some of the ideas including potentially reducing summer programs, reducing the number of bus routes, and then the activities funding. So that's, and again, I'd prefer not to make any cuts at all at this juncture, but I just wanted to throw that out there in case the board wanted to explore it or to maybe have further discussion on those particular items tomorrow.
Dr. Minor?
I'll respond to the summer school programming. So most of our summer school programming is grant funded, and so there's not a lot of hard dollar savings there to consider. And I think that's one of those areas, the little bit of hard dollars that we do have, there's a large return on investment, especially for some of our most at-risk students. And so that's not really a place that the board is going to get substantial savings for. In terms of the busing conversation, that's a big conversation. I mean, we've been working very hard at trying to increase our attendance rates, getting students to school regularly. We would not see the increases that we're seeing in a number of different areas, I think, if we do reduce transportation. And so while there may be some cost savings there, there's certainly huge impacts to student success and the impacts that it has on students and families. And so that would be a pretty big conversation for the board to have, and then probably some contractual obligations as well.
Yeah. There's bigger, higher level contractual issues that would prevent us from reducing routes, actually.
Thank you. That's, sorry, don't mean to speak out of turn, but I wanted to have the discussion and understand it better. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burgess. Okay, so we've got Miss Carol Hubbard, then I'm going to put myself in, and then we'll go to Miss Julian. Miss Carol Hubbard.
I just have a quick question. It's about the enrollment. So I was looking at the proposed budget that we had prepared in April, and it did say 11,626 students were expected. With all of the things that have happened over the last couple of months, have we had any significant changes in our enrollment numbers, or are we expecting any significant changes in those?
We have not seen any enrollment fluctuations out of the ordinary in the last few months since consolidation was decided. Is that your question, Ms. Carol Hubbard? Yeah, we haven't seen any abnormal fluctuations in enrollment.
Thank you, Miss Carol Hubbard. Okay, I'm going to throw myself in just because I'm sorry, I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball here. After taking into the realization of how much of a fund balance draw that is, I just have some reservations. I don't mind a fund balance draw, but I am going to put feelers out there. I don't want to cut anything more to our students. I said that when this came out. I've said that over and over and over again, that I don't want this to impact our students. I want to keep this as far away from our students as possible due to everything we have done this year, from custodial to the school closures to all the other cuts, all the personnel we've gotten rid of. It's a lot. But, and I know this might not be favored, I would be in favor of seeking out board feelings on what another reduction to administration might look like. I know that that's a big hit. I know it's a lot. You guys already took 500, but I know that there was also a little bit of support for another 100 to 200K. If it's there, cool. If it's not, I'll drop it. I just want to throw that out there because we've had a lot of hits to our students, and I know that puts a hit on you guys as well. And then there's also our curriculum that we could zero that out, and I know that we have zeroed that out year after year. It's just somewhere that there's a little bit that we could throw in that wouldn't affect us so hard at our brick and mortar buildings. Go ahead, Dr. Minor.
Respectfully, to our hardworking administration, they day in and day out impact student success. Good schools don't happen without good leaders and good leadership in the district. We just adopted a 5-year strategic plan who's going to do the bulk of that work in terms of organizing that work. It's going to be administration working with our educators. And so I don't think it's irresponsible for the board to look at potentially cutting administration, but I just want to be really clear that when we're talking about student impacts, any cut at this point in time is going to impact students. And so our administrators sacrifice a lot for the work that they do day in and day out, and it truly does impact student success. So just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Dr. Miner. With that, Kate, we're going to jump back into it, as I know there's a couple of responses to that, but we're going to go to Miss Julian as she's been waiting, and then we'll go to Miss Maple, Mrs. Hardy, and then to Mr. Doran.
Okay, I'll speak to a couple things that were brought up. I'm not in favor of reducing busing. I think that just furthers the divides between those who have options to have parents or family or friends drive them to school and those who do not have options. So I think it widens the equity gap for our students. So I would not be in favor of the reductions for busing. And I know that wasn't put forward by you. That was put forward by our union representation. Can you talk a little bit about it? And thank you. We really do, although right now, this conversation to me right now is, could be relatively short because we have a cushion and we can use it as a stopgap for, something that we anticipate we won't have to use because we have confirmation from several legislators that they will come back in January and override the veto. So this to me is a stopgap conversation. However, we have to look at the long view for this. At what point are we able to, and I'm reflecting now on what we've done at the university, at what point would we be able to put a freeze in all step increases for all employees if we were looking at that for future fiscal years? And what would that total dollar amount be?
And so in terms of our non-represented employees, that's something that you would have to put in place prior to the issuance of the contracts, which we do in about the April, May timeframe. So you would want to put that in place and it would be part of the board vote when you look at the non-represented contract. We've had a lot of discussion around step freezes for our support staff and teachers and principals. And we have not had advisement from legal to go that direction because that would come through the negotiations process, and did not feel that was something that we can unilaterally impose against the unionized groups. And so that would need a little bit more depth and probably a little bit more looking into. But in terms of non-reps, you would need to do that prior to the issuance of the contracts.
Okay, and then if a follow-up, would we have to go into like financial exigency to do that with represented?
It would be a discussion that you would have to have. We're going into negotiations in the next year anyhow, so that might be a discussion that you can have with the union groups, looking at whether or not to freeze steps because they are a part of the negotiated agreement.
Sure.
So it would be a discussion point at the table.
Yeah.
For the non-represented, that's a vote. There's not a discussion to be had.
Yeah, I understand. Can you? This doesn't need to happen right now, and I'm going to say that I'm not in favor of this, but I would also like to know the dollar amount of, and we don't need to have that right now. But I'm looking forward to fiscal year 27, and I'm looking down a barrel at a huge deficit that we are going to have to we're going to have to close more schools, and I thank others for bringing that up. We were looking at closing 5 this year. We closed 3. I think that we need to responsibly look in the next couple years. How are we going to weather this storm for fiscal year 27? Also knowing that the borough went way above and beyond what we anticipated. So having that number in advance, and it doesn't have to happen right now, but I think that that's important for this board to understand what that automatic step increase is, and what we would have to look at for fiscal year 27. And then I have one more follow-up.
Can I clarify real
Yes.
quick? Are you asking for that data on all employee groups or just non-represented employees?
It would be great if they were broken out into non-represented and then represented. And again, I want to say I am not advocating for this, but to know that number is helpful. And also, SPED vacancies were not reported in this. What are our SPED vacancies right now?
Give us a minute and we can
Okay.
pull that for you.
Thank you.
Kate Hall might know off the top of her head.
Well, I don't know off the top of my head. Are you looking for both ESSA and FEA or just?
Yeah.
And I think it's important for the board and the public to know that there are maintenance of equity issues in terms of what we need to spend for special education. And so that's why it's not included. One, because we're legally obligated to provide special education services at a very high level. And two, there are certain triggers of amounts that we need to spend. And so that's why it's not in front of the board in terms of potential cuts.
Oh, yeah, and I appreciate that. And to clarify, the reason for my question is because it does factor in, though, to a negative contingency. So knowing that number helps me go, okay, that's where that forward-thinking negative contingency might come from, is in the SPED vacancies.
Okay, we're going to move on. Miss Maple, and then Mrs. Hardy.
I don't remember what I had to say.
Mrs. Hardy.
And I have two not related ones. To the first piece with the admin cuts, kind of a question, and I'll follow up. Dr. Miner, if you wouldn't mind saying what that $500,000 cut actually came out to, as far as like what that looks like now that you've got the budget and you've signed contracts.
Yeah, it's roughly 3 to 4 positions. I'm not sure where we landed. I think it was 4. And over the last 5 years, I think we're up to 25 or 26% cuts to administration. And so, we truly are getting to the point where, we've got one person in a department that does the work. Or 2 people that do payroll for the entire district with 1,000 employees. And so we are running very efficiently in terms of administration already. I also think it's important to note we've gone over costs for administration, but administration is a very broad term. And there's a lot of people lumped into that, and the daily rate of non-represented employees is actually lower than our teachers and FPA. And so, yes, they work oftentimes 12 months, but their daily rate is lower. And so to think that we're going to balance our budget on the backs of our non-represented employees is not accurate. There's not enough employees there to balance our budget. Would it help? Potentially, but you still need recruiting, you still need HR, you still need IT, you still need special education services. So all the people that are working in this building are necessary components of a well-functioning district.
Just my follow-up to that piece is I'm not in support of making more cuts to admin in this budget. The board might decide to do more next year. It seems like it's always something that they put on the table if we keep cutting. I think, like as Dr. Meinert stated, it does harm students. I remember being a teacher in this district, not really understanding what the school board or admin really did. And it wasn't like I was not an intelligent person. It just was so far removed from my classroom. And being on the board now, I can see all of the functions and how important they are and how often thankless they are. And also the breaking points. Having one person who fulfills a necessary job means when that person's out, no one's doing that job. You can only cut so much, and we've cut to the bone everywhere, including our admin. And then I had another one, if I can. To the idea of freezing steps, also won't be here if you guys end up debating that, but I'm going to tell you as an educator, it is a nationwide teacher shortage. Anywhere you go, they are looking for teachers, and that means you're competing in a nationwide market. And if you freeze steps, you are going to lose your staff. Because I'm going to tell you as a teacher, I probably wouldn't stick around if that happened to me, and I knew I could move and get paid what my family needs to survive. It sounds really easy, but there are other places. There are very close states that pay way more than we currently are. Fairbanks is an amazing place to live, but that kind of action will push people to make other choices for their families.
Thank you, Mrs. Hardy. I just want to make a comment about bringing up admin. I expected the torches and pitchforks, absolutely. I just want it to be known, everybody in this room knows how much I respect and appreciate every single administrator and every single person in this building and how hard you guys all work. And I in no way am trying to diminish or eliminate that in any way. We have just done a lot. And so searching through this budget, just looking for anything possible, but also to just further prove the point to the listening public and those who are paying attention that there is nothing. There is not a good cut. There is not anything in this budget that doesn't impact somebody somehow, somewhere, some way in our district that doesn't turn into something detrimental. It's just unfair. Mr. Doran.
Okay, all right, lots of stuff. The first thing I want to say, because I think we're floating on a point of order. The question of freezing steps, et cetera, regarding this year is the same answer for non-reps as for negotiated agreements. Those contracts are done. So that's not an issue. Talking about contract stuff, we're really moving into negotiations, and I think we need to be careful about that and
Good point, Mr. Doran.
hold
Thank you.
that for the future. So I'll say yes. Though early on I advocated for additional cuts to administration, I am not in favor of that. We are in a different situation. We're dealing, as I said, we're less than two months from the start of school. We've got these things, and it's not a blame game at this point. I mean, we all know what happened, but what do we do with it? So a couple of things that I will chime in on that has been mentioned is, bus transportation. I would say that I would favor looking at consolidation, K-12 buses, things of that sort. It might, but you answered the question. That's not an immediate. With that being said, when we look at draw on fund balance, we're over $3 million, 3.3 to 3.5 in actuality. And I know Mr. DeGraw stepped out, but we have the vacancies, which I believe is 1.1 million. We have transportation, which is 0.5 million. We have the suggested fund balance drawer here. That brings us at 2.5. If we add all the certified positions back in, that brings us to 3.3 to 3.5 million. So we're continuing to draw increased amounts from fund balance. So that's where I say I'm very comfortable with 1 million now having the least impact to disruption for services, having to cut, if we had to cut another $1 million in positions or services this close to the school year, it'd be dramatic. So I'm comfortable with that, but adding to that, I am really hesitant. And so we're still looking at least 800,000 reductions. I do put out there the possibility of putting a pause on the hiring of the 2 new best teacher positions. Effectively, the enrollment projections for next year in BEST are about the same. Actually, I believe a little bit down from what we had this year. Projection is. I have shared with some people, I'm fascinated to watch the correspondence numbers across the state, which doubled and tripled, mostly tripled in 2020, 2021, and whether we will start seeing a decline in that as we get further away from that remote instruction time. Talk to me another time about more of the rationale behind that, but I think there's something there. But I think those were 2 new positions, which reduces the PTR in that, and we could put a hold on it. I think there's good rationale to make them in there. I did want to ask a question about the MAP report. Given the assessment and accountability questions that are to us, we look at how our students are doing. In some ways, MAP is perhaps a more accurate measure of our student performance and progress than the state assessment, since we don't really know much in that. But could you explain the impact of that? Where's that?
Yeah, so actually the state pays for most of the MAP tests. We picked up a few hundred of them. State pays for the vast majority of it. This reduction would include us no longer giving the science MAP part. We would still do the MAP growth, which is where we get all of our data, and it reduced like an hour video training that we would have. So we would still have with this we would still have all of the MAP data that we had before.
Okay, minus the science. So it's really the science report that where those. Okay, thank you. And I had a clarification. You listed classified vacancies and numbers, but it's not in the recommendation. So I'm assuming in the chart that said we have got 11 classified vacancies there, those are all planned to be funded and kept, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Put me back in the queue.
You got it. And actually, at this time, we're going to take a brief 10-minute recess. Be back here at 7:10. Okay, we are back from recess and we're going to jump back into our discussion on budget and we're going to turn it over to Ms. Hall, who has a numbers update for us.
So just related to the special education vacancies, and knowing that this is a moving target, we've been hiring every day, which is great news. We have approximately 33 by my count, 35 by HR count of ESSA vacancies. And again, that number kind of can change every day, I think is why there's some difference there. And then approximately 10 FEA certified vacancies.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Questions from the board? Ms. Julian.
Okay, so I will speak to the negative. I'm going to speak a little bit to the negative contingency because that was I brought that forward for the board to consider, and I'm really grateful that we are projecting. I think it's 0.63%, which is just a little bit over $1 million. And so a lot of, and I understand it is not easy to understand. So I don't. Because it took some time for me to really understand it as well. And we're saying that it's fund balance use. However, it's a different type of fund balance use. So yes, it is fund balance use, but I just want to speak a little bit to it because it's instead of those savings, those vacancy savings that would be going into fund balance. And again, it is also, I also want to say that it is completely reasonable and also understandable that an organization of this size has this level of has vacancies. So like even at like a 2% rate, because things come and go and things change during the year. So it's not anybody's fault that we have vacancies. And I want to preface that because we are doing our best to fill them and I'm so excited. But we do have vacancies. Any organization this size does. So instead of those savings going in, so unanticipated savings from vacancies throughout the year, what we're doing is we have this negative number in our budget and you're filing against that negative number. So you're not necessarily dipping into any of the fund balance we have now. It's just future fund balance. So it is true that it is fund balance, but it's a future use of that versus it going into fund balance. You're kind of charging against that. So I want to caution us that because it is easy to lump it together and say, oh, it's over a $3 million draw on fund balance. It's not. What I think we're talking about right now is potentially going up to, if somebody can help me, because I have had a lot of numbers going through my head, we're potentially looking at using fund balance to stop the bleed right now, which is about 1.75 million. Is that correct? Yes. So we're looking at a draw, and that is a true draw of 1.75 million, of which hopefully, if the legislators hold the line and come back and override this line item veto that was targeted at education, we can reopen the budget. And would this be correct? Could we then reopen the budget in January and back out that fund balance draw of 1.75 million?
So I would just propose that it would naturally happen without the board reopening the budget. So the board, by all means, could reopen the budget. I've never heard of that occurring. And I would propose that everything would right size naturally without board action, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so just to clarify, then we would just kind of project, if that happens, then we'd have a surplus in a sense. I'm going to put quotations around surplus of 1.75 million that would just be in fund balance that we wouldn't touch.
Correct. It would be anticipated that fund balance utilization would be offset by the increased revenue coming back to us.
Okay. And then I do also want to say that I support the investment into joining the lawsuit because there are other states that have had similar lawsuits since, I think, 2018. There's been other states more recently that have had lawsuits to the effect of the one that is being organized statewide. We are at a position now where we are completely scraping at the bones. And I also want to say that I did bring up the idea of the question of what is a freeze on salaries look like and what would that be. I completely agree that if we were to do something like that in the future, any future cuts that we make are going to hurt so bad, and we are already at the bones. And we have to do everything that we can to maintain what we have right now and fill all of our vacancies, hopefully. But hearing even what we have in SPED, I know that we're going to be fine with that 0.65% vacancy rate projection that we have, plus dipping into fund balance. So I'm in support of using fund balance to not make any additional cuts to teachers right now, to use fund balance, and then to hopefully receive a surplus of negative fund balance use so we don't have to actually use fund balance use this next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Julian. Before we go to Mrs. Hardy and Mr. Doran, when it comes to breaking open the budget, I truly think that, and we don't even know if I'll be here next year, whether or not that happens, the board could give Dr. Minor administration the ability to make sure our budget is good come the veto. If they need to make our budget whole, the board could give them the authority to make the budget whole or to place it in fund balance. I don't think it would be necessarily a call to break open our budget and have to do something again in January. And correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Minor.
No, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. We will go to Mrs. Hardy and then Mr. Doran.
It's just a question on that budgeting for vacancies, and I don't know why I never asked it before. 0.65%, and I know not all positions are created equal. About how many vacancies is that roughly? Like, I know S is different than certified.
Yeah, I believe we were talking certified vacancies. It was roughly between 8 and 9 positions. If my memory serves me well, it was certified vacancies that we were talking about.
Mr. Doran?
Thank you. First to process, the board can always amend the budget. It doesn't matter. And districts did that in 1986 when Governor Sheffield cut the education budget by 50% in July. So after all the approved budgets were done. So just point of process, we can always do that. And if we get more money, we can adjust accordingly. I will say that I do support the CEE legal fund in a sense, and having been around at the time that they led the initial court case for adequate funding, and then having had a relatively recent update on it, which at that point they were saying hold on lawsuits, but things have changed in the 2 years and stuff. So I feel very confident of them as an organization to represent so many of the education organizations in the state to take the lead on adequate funding. I look in terms of the concerns of the certified staff positions, and in part that's where I put the 2 new additional positions from BEST on the table that could reduce the number of teachers, certified teachers in the elementary, for instance. Or I would also put on the table, Mr. Burgess alluded to it before, Barnett, one exploratory. We can't replace them all, but I could see that if we were to make some trade-offs and adjustments. And I know it's late in the process in lots of ways, but it is. As we've watched and seen things develop over the last 2 months since the April recommended budget, that it's worth putting on the table. I have a question, actually, two. One is Midnight Sun, and you might not have this tonight, but the cost of keeping that building open for 3 staff members and X number of students versus mothballing it. And I'm assuming that the 4.6 million of this closing of the 3 schools does include or accounts, that's in the slides tonight, that accounts for the fact that we're paying utilities and stuff to keep Midnight Sun open as a building.
So is the question, what's the estimate of keeping Midnight Sun building open as opposed to closing it? What's our cost estimate for doing that?
Right, and that's accounted for in the savings.
It is accounted for in our total.
We're keeping the building itself
correct.
open.
Absolutely, 100%.
Okay.
Yes.
So then the question is the cost savings between keeping it open versus mothballing, because I know the indications are that you want to keep the building for the district. Your recommendation is that we keep the building.
Yeah, so I think what's interesting here is a good use case scenario was Ben Eielson High School. When we turned that over to the borough thought that they could potentially save money in utilities, which hasn't actually come to fruition, because turns out that when you have a school full of people, that they generate a certain amount of heat, and so that offsets the utilities that you have to spend. And so I don't know that there would necessarily be any savings to mothballing it versus utilizing it. We do know that if we're utilizing it, that there's people in the building every day that, my maintenance folks tell me that when buildings are used, that systems run better as opposed to mothballing it and then trying to spin it back up. So, I don't know that there's actual savings there that the board could use and kind of inject that back into the budget.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Hardy?
Just also follow up on that same vein. Midnight Sun is supposed to house Star of the North, so we would have to find them a new home that could incur more costs since we no longer have their building.
That's correct.
Thank you, Mrs. Hardy. Mrs. Julian?
Thank you, and I appreciate, Mr. Dorn, you bringing up some new and creative solutions. I will not be, I'm not supportive of cutting our investment into BEST, and the reason is because we went through the numbers on how many new students we would have to put in or would have to gain to offset that cost and that investment, and it's not that much considering where we are investing and the locations that we are investing. I believe that it was 80 students in one location and then about 60 in another. Do you have that number, Dr. Meyer?
I don't. I think it was actually lower than that. And important to point out that our enrollment currently is higher than it was last year at this point in time. And so, we are growing and growing back from when we lost some students because of some guardrails we put around the program.
And just to clarify, the enrollment for BEST is up?
Yes.
Oh, great. Yeah. We have a lot of people in the community have talked about their desire to reinvigorate our education to draw out-of-district students back into our district. And one of the things that I'm proud that we did as a board is we invested in strategic placement for BEST satellites. I think that it is a lot more feasible, like the next step up to drawing an out-of-district student, of which 20% of K through 12 public education students in our Fairbanks North Star Borough attend out-of-district homeschooling. I think that the easier jump back to our district is to go to our homeschooling program, not necessarily a brick and mortar in a certain location. We know that there is a lot of homeschooling families out in the Two Rivers area. Just, that comes with the remoteness of that. And there's also a lot of new growth in where we have our borough growing is in the North Pole area. So, and we know that a lot of military families choose to homeschool because they're, of course, moving around quite frequently. So I think that that is a strategic investment to increase our enrollment and draw out of district students to our district. And so I would not be in favor of walking those investments back.
Thank you, Mrs. Julian. Mr. Dorn.
Question is, in terms of hiring pause, you had established a hiring pause, I think, through the end of this month. Could you give us a status on that?
Yeah, through tomorrow. I really wanted to see what the board was going to do and the conversations we were going to have. And, there was no sense in hiring folks if the board was going to go in the direction of cutting staffing positions. And so depending on the outcome of tomorrow night's approved budget process, I would probably lift the pause. There have been a few positions here and there that were necessary and needed that I said, yes, go ahead and move forward with that. But in general, we have a pause on hiring through tomorrow.
Thank you. And question regarding extracurriculars, et cetera. I know some districts, because of the governor's veto, are looking at further restrictions on that. There's the pending regulations from the governor through the State Board of Education to limit what boroughs can support. And I know some boroughs have been supportive beyond their local contribution under their Parks and Rec and things. So are we getting anything from other districts? What's their impact on those types of schedulings, and what costs might be there? Although it needs to be well recognized that the majority of our travel costs are not covered by the district. They're covered by parents of kids who are doing that and other donations from the community. So there's not necessarily a lot of cost savings. They might simply not travel as much. But do you have anything on that?
So nothing credible in terms of, the pausing of schedules or anything officially happening. I've definitely heard superintendents have that conversation, and specifically if an override does not happen, that some districts might take a look at spring semester and pausing activities. As we're looking at it, there's not a huge amount of savings for the district, especially when you look at second semester specifically. We incur a lot of costs in first semester because a lot of the big kind of expensive sports and activities happen first semester, or at least start in first semester and bleed over. The costs that we incur for activities are for contracts, SAS contracts, and officiating, and a little bit of gear. That's it. So as you said, travel and a lot of the other things are picked up by parents. At the high school level, it's about $900,000 that we provide for activities. And when I say activities, it is activities. So it's not just sports, it's your student councils, your music, drama, different things like that. At the middle school level, just over 200,000. So all in about 1.1, 1.2. That's their total in savings. But again, huge impact to students as you start to chip away at potential activities. We know, as Ms. Hardy said, it could be a big driver for students wanting to come to school to feel connected to their school communities. So definitely a proponent of activities, which I know you are as well, but haven't heard anything specifically from districts that they've already started that process, but definitely some talk for second semester if the veto is not overridden.
I appreciate that explanation, because I think it's important when we look at conversations about second semester. Well, we could do these, that it really is not very much at all, and the importance to the I call it, they're not extracurricular, they're intercurricular because they apply the skills that they learned in the classrooms.
Is there any other questions from other board members at the moment? Seeing none, Mr. Doran, go ahead and continue.
Could you give us a firmer look and maybe, preview tonight and if necessary, bring it tomorrow? The whole financial picture of HB 57, I mean, we're focused on the BSA in our conversations tonight. There was an increase to transportation, and which reduced the amount that we anticipate we might have to draw from general funds. And so I think your latest number is about the 500,000, $500,000 mark. Correct. The reading monies that were in HB 57 but dependent upon another bill, where that most current standing on that. I know it's in great question at least, but if you could give, and if there were any other financial aspects that I'm missing offhand.
So I believe it's SB 113. That was the tax bill that it has not been transmitted to the governor as of right now. And so I don't think that that's money that we could count on for READS Act or reading proficiencies for this year, as well as it had a CTE component. So if there were leftover funds available from that tax bill, that could then trigger some CTE funding as well. And so we're following that very closely. We were at a legislative luncheon last week, and I asked specifically about that bill and when it was going to be transmitted. Not a lot of credible information there in terms of when it's going to move, but hopeful that it'll move and it'll be signed. I mean, the governor over and over again said he wanted the legislature to provide money for reading, and I think they did that through a tax bill. Whether we can debate whether or not he liked the way that the legislature enacted that money, but there's money there to help reading for districts, and so I'm hopeful that that bill is transmitted to the governor in a timely process and that he signs off, because he could get one of those big things that he wants, which is real funding for reading for districts.
I'm going to put you back in the queue, Mr. Doran. Mrs. Julian.
Thank you. I just want to clarify some language that it is closing a corporate loophole for Hillcorp. And so it actually isn't necessarily a tax bill, but it is closing a corporate loophole, which will help fund reading gains for our students and community or career and technical education. And so if people want to advocate, Dr. Meinert, for that, what do they do?
They call their legislators and the governor and tell him that how important that reading funding is for their students, and also tell him that he's been wanting reading funding and there's a mechanism to do that.
And I also want to say that we have an amazing, thank you for giving me the mic a second. We also have an amazing union representation through our laborers who need those jobs, need those kids coming out of high school ready for those jobs that are wrench ready and shovel ready. And they are excited about our career and technical and do not want us to have to make any cuts to career and technical education. So this is another thing that they could advocate for, to make sure that our career and technical education at least remains as it is, and hopefully we can invest in that, because the more that we invest in those types of things, the better our economy is and the stronger our state is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Julian. Any other board members with questions at the moment? Seeing none, Mr. Doran, I know you have a list.
Okay, thank you. But I'm getting towards the end. There is hope ahead of us. But on the opposite side of that, I am very much in favor of making cuts now. I don't want to, we don't want to, we didn't want to make the ones earlier in previous years. But what I'm very mindful of is that it's a very, very thin thread at best for an override in January. Earlier this year, there was a 57 vote in favor of education BSA increase, 57-3. Well, we had 17 votes to give away. We lost 18 on the override. This time, we have not 17 votes to give away, we have 1. And there's 6 months for people to change their mind and pressure to be put on, and we know there'll be pressure that'll be put on our legislators, not to override. As there will be pressure to override, but it's a very, very slim thing. And so I'm really concerned that we not put ourselves over a barrel in January. To have to come back and cut in January leaves us very, very few options and more disruption. It's easier to add back in. I don't know, I'm sorry, I draw upon my practical experience of doing that for decades with Title I funding. When we had a cut at the beginning of the year, and then in January we get, oh, here's $50,000 you can go ahead and use it. Our district has done a lot better in evening that out, but it still comes up, and it's easier to add back in. When we talk about, the suggestion of asking the administration to put a reduction list in January if we don't cut now, and we have to cut then, which, to be clear, I do not advocate. I do think that we ask the administration to put together, I'm calling it a January initiative. If they do override and we get the $4.5 million that we're losing now, that we get your recommendations, and we are thinking ahead of time for that. So if it comes, we can act on it immediately, as opposed to coming in January and all of a sudden saying, oh, we got it, now what are we going to do with it? But I know as a principal, I found that very, very worthwhile. As soon as I heard I got more Title I money in January, I was ready to hire our staff, our community, parents had come together, and we knew what we were going to put it to. And we were able to put it in play right away. So I would ask that, and that's a way of advocating that we make the additional hard cuts now, cushioned with the $1 million out of fund balance, cognizant, and I do understand the vacancy formula very well, but it does push us. We're $2.5 million potential draw on our fund balance right now. And, if we add to that, we're pushing over $3 million a draw. And I do think that that's putting us in difficult waters. I do think that, so I'm going to leave it there, that I think we need to make the cuts now. It's a good balance. I appreciate the recommendations from administration. And I think it leads us in a responsible way forward. I'm hopeful for the legislature to come through, but it is a squeak at best. And I think in terms of fairness, in the middle of the year, to avoid chaos, potential chaos, we need to make those cuts now, and then later hopefully be able to reverse some of those and maybe even go back to some of the things we would have liked to have seen 2 weeks ago, that those things are still active and in our minds.
Thank you, Mr. Dorn. Anything further from any other board members? Questions, comments, ideas? Mrs. Julian.
I just have a point of clarification through the chair. To Mr. Dorn, I want, so specifically is the recommendation to make the cuts that were put forward by the administration? I just haven't clearly understood that.
Go ahead, Mr. Dorn.
May I answer? Yeah. Yes. Am I totally in favor of each and every one? I could debate, but I do think they are very reasonable. And so, yes, I am going to support their recommendation at this point. I think it's a good balance. I could nickel and dime here or there, but it's the bottom line is it's a good amount and a good approach.
Ms. Carol Hubbard.
Thank you. I just wanted to just point out that on the budget that we approved in April, by closing 2 schools, by closing Midnight Sun and Pearl Creek, we reduced 44 teachers. And currently, we have only kept 6. Is that right? 44? No. 7? Sorry, my math is bad right now. We've lost 37 teachers in the elementary grades. And I just want to reiterate that I really do not support removing 5 more teachers out of the elementary school. I just think that would be a really huge disservice to our students.
Dr. Minor?
Just a little bit of clarification on that, because there's a lot of confusion around school closures and class sizes and those types of things. And so the loss of staff related to school closures is, and not staff, I mean actual positions, because we haven't laid off people because of school closures, is actually one of the benefits we touted. We needed to right size our school district, and part of that is staffing. We haven't been able to fill all of our positions every year, and so right sizing the footprint that we have does get at staffing appropriately. Now, when the board increases PTR, that is an actual reduction in staff that raises class sizes. And so just want to be very clear that as we close schools, that doesn't mean that we raise class sizes automatically. That's a lever to try to keep class sizes status quo or even potentially lower them in the future, which I think you know, but just wanted to make sure that was clear for the public.
Follow up, Ms. Carol Hubbard.
Okay, and then I'll let Mr. DeGraw jump in. Do you want to jump in first?
Just real briefly, also a significant decline in enrollment led to reduced teaching staff, approximately 600 students lower.
And the 600, okay, so I'm going to jump on that. The 600 students lower was when we ended at 11,626, that's 600 less than fewer students than what we started with?
Yeah, if you're comparing staff to current year to next year, there was a significant number of classroom teachers attributable to a lower enrollment in addition to school consolidation. When you get down to the actual staff reduced, it was the 14.4 attributable to PTR, and then we had a couple of counselors, a couple of Barnett staff members as well, so you're probably in the 18 to 20 range total, not counting school consolidation, and then a significant decline in enrollment.
Okay, and we increased PTR already this year from the year that just ended to the school year that's going to start in September. We've already increased PTR by 1 from K all the way to 12.
That's correct.
Equally across the board.
Yep.
Okay. I just really don't want to increase PTR at all anymore. It's just kind of the thing we need to, I don't know. That's my opinion.
Thank you, Ms. Carol Hubbard. Further questions from the board? Mr. Dorn?
I'm sorry, I'm going to go back to the clarification question. Basically, with the consolidation, the savings, staff position savings are not from teachers per se. It's from like the principal, counselor, nurse, those types of positions. So there's about,
The majority of the savings.
yeah,
That's
and
correct.
it's about 10, 12. It's not classroom teachers that
Yep.
ostensibly they're following the kids and moving. So.
Yep.
Anything further? Mr. Dorn, did you have any more questions for administration?
No, I think I'm good for tomorrow. I know what it.
Mrs. Julian?
Yeah, I think that this is just, it's going to help me understand a little bit more about the reasons why. But we're looking at right now a $1.7 million deficit that we're trying to bridge before the end of this month. And that's about equal to a school closure or a little bit less than a school closure.
Depending on the size.
Yeah.
Right around that.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about why, I'm sure that it probably crossed your mind as to like, maybe that we put that forward as a recommendation or not, or why that wasn't recommended right now. And I understand like we are.
To close a school?
Yeah, to close another school. I mean, it's just, I think it's an important conversation to have at the work session because of course that is a lever that we could pull at some point. Although I'm not advocating for doing that at this moment, but I do go back to, a recommendation was put forward for 5 schools. We as a board decided to close 3 and reduce another school. But that might have to be a conversation that we have in the future. And I just thank you for not putting it forward right now, but if you can speak to that at all during this work session, that I think would be helpful.
Sure, I can speak to it. When we started the school consolidation process almost a year ago, I was pretty clear in that as we went through this process, let's make the decisions that we're going to make and let's live with those decisions for a while. I truly feel like our community needs time to heal from the repeated closures over and over again, and our community needs stability. We went through a tremendous process, both as a community and as a board, to land where we did. I think the board made a great decision with where they landed with the information that they had. We knew greater times weren't coming in terms of a lot of injected funding into the school district, and yet we landed where we landed, right? Through a lot of public input, a lot of nights that you guys put in day in and day out in terms of discussing this option, and you made a decision. And administration then took that decision and did a lot of additional work in terms of redistricting, communication, having family nights at each of our individual schools. And so families are now somewhat settled in terms of what school their children will arrive at in about a month and a half time. I mean, we're talking about middle of August, our schools are going to start and our families know where their kids are going to go. If I recommended a closure at this point in time, it's upsetting the apple cart and we're going to have to redistrict and go through that entire process again. And so that's why I didn't put it forward right now. I don't think the cost savings are worth the amount of anxiety and chaos it would cause in our district, and why, frankly, I'm not in favor of having a conversation about school closure next year unless the board is directing me to do so. I do think that our community needs to heal and we need to move forward, and we need to see what this new footprint that we've created for ourselves looks like.
Thank you, Dr. Miner. I couldn't agree more. Anything further from the board for tonight before tomorrow's meeting? Seeing none, seeing nothing. I thank you all for your work. Thank you to the administration. Tomorrow will not be easy, but thank you all for your time in getting us to this point. And with that, I will see you all tomorrow. We are now adjourned.